Hello, and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast, bringing you expert teachers to help you create that mind, body, and spirit connection, both with yourself and with your true love. And today I'm really excited. Of course, I'm Coach Valerie Green from coachvaleriegreen.com. And today I'm really excited to interview sex and relationship expert Mike Mantell. Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Hey, I'm excited to have you here because we were chatting, I think, for over an hour in our initial meeting about all these topics. And the
hmm
topic that we chose, which I'm really excited about, is called the connection cure. What to do
hmm
when you feel disconnected from your partner. And before we dive in, we've just been chatting, and I think this is such an important topic because um the research shows, especially by John Gottman, who's been doing this research for about 40 years, that the number one key to a healthy relationship, a sustainable relationship, is to stay in connection as much as possible. And that spans the four dimensions that this podcast is about, which is mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And so that's what we'll talk about in this interview is when you get out of connection, how to feel like you have the tools and the resources and the paradigm shifts and the mindsets to get back in connection. Because let's face it, if we have anxious attachment or insecure attachment, it's really hard when we feel like our partner is not there for us and we spin out with our thoughts about anxiety. It's really hard to know what to do to create it rather than to just push it away, right?
Hmm.
And so that's my intention for this interview is to just give people all these tools that we were talking about, right? So that we can feel that warmth and playfulness and goodwill and trust that we feel when we're connected. So that's what I'm so excited about. And so, Mike, why don't we just dive in? And I'd love to hear, because I love your take on it. How would you describe, first of all, what are the different types of connection that we could
Mm.
have in a relationship?
Yeah. Um, I also like that you brought John Gottman in too, because I feel like his research is really compelling. So I would say when I was thinking about this recently, I actually think like each partnership has their own unique dimensions or ways that they feel connected with each other. But I think as like a standard, it's helpful to have different buckets or categories or dimensions for people to just think about how they relate with those.
Definitely.
And I like the four you laid out. I think actually originally when I thought about this, I'd thought of five,
Ooh,
which are
okay.
similar,
Yeah.
um, which is mind, which I guess I would consider just honestly, I might just consider it conversation or sharing of ideas or maybe like processing life together. Then
Mhm.
I had body, which could look a lot of different ways, but just like most simply, like how, what are the ways in which you and your partner's bodies like to connect with each other? And
Yeah.
like, obviously, sex is a big way for a lot of people, but certainly not the only way. Like, honestly, for my partner and I, probably dance is the main way
Mhm.
that our bodies like each other.
Yeah.
A third, I also call spirit, which is kind of like an amorphous word because that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think eye gazing can be a powerful way to tap into that, feeling transcendence together. So that might honestly just be in nature. It also
Yes.
could be like the sense, and this is kind of it depends on different worldviews, but like the sense that like you're both like your paths are merging or you're on the same path together. And like that's almost like an existential thing of like, where is my life path leading me and how does it relate with yours?
Yes. And actually, I mean, I would call that like a shared vision and a shared purpose of the relationship.
Mm, yeah, cool. Let me name the last two and then I'd actually, well, we can go into that, but I'm curious to hear more about what that means to you.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Fourth one I was calling heart, which seems similar to emotions, but because I think that differs from the body because the body, like there's so many different energies you can share together and so many different ways you can cathart or be sensual. Uh, but the heart is like I mean, if that's not there, you're just in trouble. But just being able to
Yeah.
have goodwill, being able to appreciate each other, being able to see the best in each other, feeling love, etc. And then
Hmm.
the fifth thing I would
Compassion,
add,
empathy, all of that heart-centered care.
exactly,
I agree. Yep.
forgiveness. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Very, and remorse and regret and guilt, those all actually come, those are
Yeah.
the dark sides of getting back to feeling connected when you care about the other person. I feel like that all kind of comes from the heart.
Good point. Yeah. And then the fifth one I would add is childishness.
Hmm.
And because I feel like that's just like a very specific energy that maybe isn't universally important, but I think for a lot of relationships, it there's something when you trust someone so deeply to see all of you, it can be really vulnerable to be playful or silly or immature, but there's something so deeply connecting about being able to share that space with somebody. So, anyways, I would
Yes.
lay out those five as possible ideas to play with.
I actually love that. And that's even more specific than just mind, body, spirit, because that actually, even just given what you said, gives me ideas for how to create that kind of connection because I think it's more specific.
Mm. Hmm.
That's wonderful. And I mean, just to bring back in John Gottman, and I do want to say, I mean, all the attachment researchers have
Mm.
had very telling results from the research as well, not just Gottman. There's a lot of research about why feeling connected to your partner is what keeps relationships alive in all these dimensions. Um,
Mm.
and all these dimensions are part of what makes up secure attachment as well, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to just jump into the tools, or the
Yeah.
strategies or the ways. What I want to say about just what you said earlier that you wanted to hear about, my thoughts
Uh-huh.
about the shared vision and values. Um,
Yeah.
as far as John Gottman's research goes, and my understanding, that's the number one thing that couples say causes them to break up is
Mm.
that they grew apart, like they didn't have that
Mm-hmm.
shared vision, shared values. And so I mean,
Hmm.
I wanted to say that in my opinion that actually comes
Hmm.
first. And if you're feeling disconnected, I think that the highest leverage place to go is to that first inside
Uh-huh.
oneself, not necessarily approaching your partner with that, but to say, what is my vision for what I want in relationship? What are my values and how can I live
Mm.
them? And then once I'm living true to myself and my own values, then it's easier to approach my partner to connect. Which
Uh-huh.
that strategy I think was highlighted the best in that book, How to Improve Your Marriage Without Talking About It by Patricia Love
Huh.
and Stephen Stonesy. They say that like the way to get reconnected if you feel disconnected is to ask yourself what, I forgot exactly their question, but it's around how to determine your values. Like, what
Uh-huh.
is the most meaningful thing about life for me as a person?
Mm.
If
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even in this relationship, what would make life meaningful for me? And how can I
Uh-huh.
align myself with that and get yourself out of feeling disconnected there and then use those values to connect with your partner? So
Right.
I mean, that's one strategy. And of course, I can elaborate more on that, but I'm interviewing you, so I want to hear about your strategies.
Yeah. Well, I want to riff on that that piece about values. That I find that really interesting because like as like I have my own individual values of things that I just think are important. And I guess I'm interested because I went through this like big personal values rabbit hole a few weeks ago and was just like in it. I was using Chat GPT to like help me. I had like a whole process.
Isn't it cool?
But
I mean, the prompts are literally infinite.
yeah, that's a whole nother thing. It's also freaky, but cool.
Very.
But so I've got my own personal values. My partner has their own personal values, but then like our relationship has its own unique set of values, which like use some of our shared values, but it's also its own thing. So
Exactly.
I think that it's a useful activity. I like what you said about like doing your own work and being clear. And I also think it's a useful activity to every so often sit down with your partner and go through some kind of reflection of like what are our top values?
Yep.
What are our top 4 or 5 values and how do we feel like we're manifesting in each of them? Or do we
Yep.
feel like any of them are blocked?
Yep.
And I'll add one more thought. You don't have to pick this up if it doesn't feel resonant, but I've also found it helpful. So I think another on the shared vision, shared values, like another type of disconnection I think that can happen is when the relationship is changing in some way, but it hasn't been consciously acknowledged yet from either
Totally.
person.
Mm-hmm.
And that change isn't necessarily good or bad. It just is. And the change could be anything. It could be like we want to start sharing the same bed, or it could be we want to sleep in different beds, or it whatever. Just like some
Or
aspect of the relationship is
you're
changing.
moving locations, or one person gets
Exactly.
a new job,
Exactly.
or one
Yeah.
person's family situation changes. There's so
Hmm.
many different ways that a relationship could shift, and
Yeah.
it's not acknowledged. And I agree that causes a disconnection.
Right. And I think it's because it's like I've found this metaphor to be interesting and useful for me that I don't know if everyone will relate with it, but I've found it useful to actually view each relationship as almost its own organism or
Yeah.
entity.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily mean that literally. I think you can just imagine it. But like, even though you and I don't know each other that well, like we have a connection and it has a certain flavor and it's growing and evolving quickly because we're getting to know each other.
Right.
And same with like my partner, it's like the relationship is an entity and we could both even imagine at a given time what it looks like or how healthy it feels.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that can happen with the changing of vision stuff is like if the relationship has evolved or wants to evolve, but we haven't quite noticed what it wants yet, so we haven't facilitated that evolution. um I'll pause there, but that feels related.
Hmm. No, I agree. And I mean, I think it would be helpful to bring this particular example to a specific situation so that people can,
Hmm.
because it is a little bit of an esoteric concept. What is a vision and values? Um,
Yeah.
and what I want to say is that numerous teachers talk about the relationship being a separate entity.
Mm-hmm.
And, many people talk about that. And, so I'm legitimizing it. And I like to look at
Hmm.
it like there's actually five relationships going on with any relationship
Mm.
between two people. There's my relationship with myself,
Uh-huh.
then there's my relationship with you and how I feel
Uh-huh.
about you, right? Going
Mm-hmm.
one way.
Uh-huh.
Then there's your relationship with yourself. Then there's how you feel about me
Mm-hmm.
going one way. And then there's the entity of the relationship.
Right. Uh-huh.
And that entity actually has its own needs.
Uh-huh.
The relationship itself needs quality time. It
Uh-huh.
needs us to be able to
Mm.
feel like we have shared agreements and shared values and shared vision and
Mm.
shared, because that's what allows us to make decisions together, and
Yeah.
that we're
Uh-huh.
actually creating something together, and the relationship needs something, some purpose for which you're creating.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise, it shifts to the default purpose of survival and procreation, which
Right.
nowadays really only keeps that feeling of being in love alive through the honeymoon
Uh-huh.
phase, which is like
Right.
3 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so we need more to keep love alive. And so I just want to validate that point of the
Yeah.
relationship as the separate entity.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I like that. I appreciate your insightfulness. I was feeling like, oh, that's great. That's really cool thought. And it has me think like it's honestly the same thing. So like when I think about my personal wellness, let's say it's like a Saturday and I'm trying to take care of myself, there's some skill set in intuiting what it is that I need. Like,
Yep.
do I need to play basketball, which I like to do, or do I need to like do some art? Like, what is the thing that my system needs to feel in balance?
Mhm.
And it's kind of the same thing with the relationship. Like, it's not like the thing that my partner and I always need is dance. Like, sometimes that is the thing we need. Sometimes we actually need eye gazing. Sometimes we need to just be very honest with how we're feeling disappointed with each other, whatever it is. But I feel like there is a skill to build, which these frameworks we're talking about can help facilitate, of being in touch with the relationship and then giving it what it needs to grow and thrive and be healthy and not just survive and scrape by.
Yeah, exactly. And I do feel like, I mean, not to make it too complicated, but each one of those five relationships have different needs, right? Like
True.
I have different needs to be independent and healthfully independent such that I can
Uh-huh.
even be able to give anything to my partner.
Mm. Uh-huh.
Because I'm not a child where I need him to provide everything to me, right? So that you have to be interdependent before you can be interdependent, independent before you can be interdependent.
Uh-huh.
And obviously he needs to be right with himself. If he's just like dysfunctional and complaining all the time and
Uh-huh.
his addictions or whatever, then he's not going to be independent to have a relationship with me, right? But then
Mm.
of course I have needs that I need from him, healthy attachment
Mm-hmm.
needs, like quality time and whatever my love language is to feel loved, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he has his own love language that he needs to get from me. And then the relationship itself, in order to feel connected, needs for us to spend time each day sharing about our
Mm-hmm.
days. And it that's to feel that intellectual connection. And then in order to
Mm-hmm.
feel the physical connection, we need to be affectionate every day
Mm.
to see how our bodies want to connect, even if we're not going to be
Mm-hmm.
sexual that day. And in
Mm-hmm.
order to feel emotionally connected, we need to connect about how each other's feeling that day. And
Uh-huh.
if there's anything that we can do for each other emotionally, we do it. So it's like, but that's what the relationship needs in order to feel connected. And
Uh-huh.
so I guess my question for you is, yeah, do you have any examples that you can think of when you felt disconnected to your partner and
Mm-hmm.
how you used this distinction of the relationship has its own entity
Mm-hmm.
in order to bring in, these five different dimensions of connection?
Yeah.
To bring this home as an example.
I do have an example coming right up. Let me just see if there's another one as well. I'll just go with this first one. But yeah, this is fairly salient. It happened like 2 weeks ago. But I was feeling disconnected from my partner and like kind of tussling with what was happening. And actually, my friend, because he's, I guess I'd call him a best friend. Anyways, he's become an attachment figure, for me, which is why I'm having trouble naming him. But he asked me the question, what is it that the relationship entity wants?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, great. Thanks for that. That's useful. But what it helped me realize in that moment is, so my partner is having health challenges at the moment, and they have like a ton of food allergies, and they're going through this period of having a lot of migraines, and they and I are about to travel. My partner uses they them pronouns, so my
Mm-hmm.
partner and I are about to travel, and so I'm like scared of like, oh, are we not going to be able to travel together? Am I going to have to curb all of my travel plans because your health isn't good right now? And what it had me realize when my friend asked me that question is like, oh, what the relationship entity is calling forth from me is the ability to become bigger in my capacity to hold my partner's health challenges. Um,
Mm.
and it took a while to get there. Like I had to go through a lot of disappointment first, which I think is also useful
Right.
practice. I had to like feel my frustrations of like, I just want things to be different. I just want to do this more often and that more often. And but after moving through that, I do feel like that's the call that's being given to me as relates to my connection right now, is how to hold more of my partner.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think that's a brilliant example because we can break it down into those five categories,
Mm,
and
uh-huh.
five entities, which happen to both be five.
Yeah.
Um, because I love what you just said, because in order to be right with your relationship with yourself, you
Hmm.
have to process through your feelings of disappointment. And that
Right.
is only relating to your relationship with yourself. It's not useful to share
Hmm.
that with your partner. It,
Mm.
it might be, but I don't think it is in this case.
Right.
Unless it is, it might be. I'm not saying it
Right.
never would be. But that's your intra-personal
Uh-huh.
relationship with yourself, is processing through your disappointment, and that would include challenging your limiting beliefs if you have any, and getting your
Hmm.
own needs met within that, such that you feel like you're not being a martyr, you're actually right with yourself.
Hmm. Right.
um And then you're looking at what does the relationship need? And that's how you tapped into your intuition that you're actually being
Mm-hmm.
called, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at what your partner needs and you're aware
Mm.
of what they need, and that's
Mm-hmm.
clear. And but you're not sure that's authentic for you unless you really look at what the relationship needs. And that's what allows you to tap into your intuition, that you're actually
Uh-huh.
being called to serve them in a higher way. But you wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
necessarily known that if you only looked at, well, what do they need? And am I going to just
Uh-huh.
sacrifice myself for them? You have to actually
Right.
look at what does the relationship need? And then what do I need to
Mm-hmm.
be right with that? And am I really right with that or not? And that's around your relationship with yourself.
Yeah, totally. Yes, well put. Well synthesized. And what it's having me have to burp.
No problem. It happens to all of us.
Yeah, human, one of the human gas bubbles. But what it has me appreciate also is I've been thinking a lot about disappointment in relationship and imperfection, which are two words I've gotten from different modalities. And it obviously like depends on the relationship. Sometimes you need to break up or you need to make a big shift.
Of course.
But I think it's I've just been appreciating how underrated it is, how imperfect relationships are. Like how imperfection is baked into a relationship. And Somatica's a sex training program that I did. They really like the word disappointment. And I've been thinking about that a lot too, of like times when I feel stuck in a connection, really being with my disappointments. And I guess I know I can give two practical ways to do this. The
Mm-hmm.
way that Somatica teaches, and I have another way too, is so like if there's something I want to change about my partner, let's say like I want them to stop being allergic to food or a million foods. If you just tell me, Mike, Angela is allergic to different foods, and that is never going to change. And then I just like sit with that and feel what that evokes. And even though it might change or it might not, it is important to, if you can accept that it'll never change, then you can be totally present with what's happening, whether or not it does change.
Exactly.
And then one other way I was toying with recently is like envisioning the thing that I want to change. Because I also have this thing where it's like every partner I want to become, I want them to be just like me in the ways that they're not like me. I'm like, why aren't you more like me in these ways? Blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so I'll
Totally.
like pick the thing I'm disappointed or frustrated in. So it could be the food thing again. And then imagine a reality where like my partner is not allergic to any foods and just like really occupy that reality of this alternate universe. And then after being with that, bring up what my current reality actually is. And then seeing like, can I be okay with that? Can I be okay with like shifting from that ideal to the actual and really like sitting with that?
Right.
And I think if you
Mm-hmm.
do that with all of the things that you feel frustrated about, it will actually like enroll you in what's happening. And if you can't be okay with it, then that's really good information. Then something needs to shift.
Totally. I actually love that you're saying all this. And I think those are
Mm,
two very good strategies for being with disappointment,
mm,
um, and seeing if you can be right with it. I when I do that kind of practice with myself, because I completely agree that um all relationships are imperfect, and that's because all of life is imperfect. No, nobody has a life, even the people who have what they think of as ideal lives.
uh-huh.
Nobody is happy all the time. Nobody wakes up in the morning feeling amazing all the time. It's part
Mm,
of the human experience to have ups and down and pleasure and pain, and you have to feel all of it, right?
mm-hmm,
um, when I'm doing those practices, because I do similar practices, I like to bring in the distinction that comes from nonviolent communication
hmm,
around needs versus strategies.
mm,
That's really helpful for me because um, that's how I can tell if um, there's a way that I can accept
uh,
something about my partner, or if it really is a deal breaker. Is saying like, okay, let's say my partner had a food insensitivities, and it was going
mm-hmm,
to be more inconvenient. Actually, in our relationship, it's me who does it.
uh-huh, yeah.
But let's say it was reversed. Um, uh, then um, and let's say I really did feel disappointment that I was going to be
Mm-hmm,
inconvenienced and I couldn't eat at all the places I wanted and be spontaneous like I wanted. I would first of all feel the feelings around that as a sensation in my body, because what
mm-hmm,
research shows as well, mostly by Jill Bolt Taylor, is that if you really feel it as a sensation in your body without the story for 90 seconds, then it gets the sensation shifts, and then you feel like you can get more insight. Meaning,
Mm.
that's when I would ask myself, okay, if my partner didn't have these issues, what need would that mean for me? What would that provide for me? Spontaneity,
Uh-huh.
let's say just like enjoying the food that I want to enjoy. And so, okay, is going on vacation in the way that I wanted the only way that I could get those needs met, or could I get those needs met in
Mm.
another way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we can't be spontaneous about food, but can we be spontaneous about other things?
Uh-huh.
And can I come up with strategies to be spontaneous about other things? And maybe I could even share those strategies with my partner.
Hmm.
And then that's what when I coach my clients, and I want to hear, how you bring this in with your clients as well. Where then if they want to talk to their partner about it, it's not that much fun to have your partner approach you and say, I'm disappointed about your food sensitivities. And so I came up with
Uh-huh.
these alternative strategies. Like, that's not the way I guide people to bring it up, right? The way I guide people to
Uh-huh.
bring it up is to talk about your vision. And like, I'm
Mm.
excited about going on vacation, and I've brainstormed different ideas to get my needs for spontaneity and enjoyment of food met, because I want
Uh-huh.
to take care of you in all your ways, and I also want to get my needs met too. And do you want to hear some of my strategies that I brainstormed? And here's how I think that we could be spontaneous and enjoy food given the limitations, and then we can still have a great time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be that I would be doing that brainstorming work in order to get past the disappointment. But if I really can't find other strategies, if like my mind is blank, then
Mm-hmm.
I would ask myself in that toggling meditation between
Mm.
um feeling the ideal situation about what you want, which I completely agree. This is a practice I love doing too, is toggling between visualizing what you want and all the associated
Uh-huh.
feelings, and then feeling the way it is now and all the associated feelings, and toggling between them. And then I would ask myself, if I can accept it, what do I need to believe in order to accept
Mm.
the way it
Mm-hmm.
is now?
Oh
Because then
yeah, good
ideas
question.
might come to me about like, oh, well, I would need to believe that there's a purpose in this for me. Oh, what is the purpose? How am I growing? What am I learning? Right. And then I could
Uh-huh.
like engage myself in a dialogue. And if I don't get any answers, then maybe it's not the right thing for me. And maybe it is a deal breaker. Right. Like,
Uh-huh.
but I would engage those kind of questions first. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I really like both of those threads. That what do you believe question is really good. That's a really good question because essentially what it's suggesting is like there might be a way of viewing my situation or like a worldview that if I inhabited that worldview, uh, everything would feel good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Or at least it would feel right.
yeah, fair. Anyway, so I just like that. And I actually had a clarifying question for you on your needs thoughts. Um, when you talk about, and this might actually just be an NVC question, but at least when you're talking about needs in this context, would you distinguish between needs and desires in partnership?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think we could do a whole interview on that, right?
Mm.
Because I think that's how you do distinguish a deal breaker versus just a disappointment,
Uh-huh.
is the distinction between a need and a desire.
Okay. So like an unmet desire is okay, but an unmet need might lead to a deal breaker.
It might, if there's no way to get that need met, right? Like, let's say
Uh-huh.
you really value spontaneity. Like, that's just
Uh-huh.
something that is really important to you in life.
Mm-hmm.
And your partner is an engineer who's by the book, who's never spontaneous, who's
Uh-huh.
very rigid, who has to be scheduled,
Yeah.
and never wants to be spontaneous and isn't willing to collaborate or compromise at all. And
Uh-huh.
all the ideas that you come up with are shot down. Then
Right.
that might be a deal breaker.
Right. What's what's really interesting to me is like obviously this is impossible, but like let's say you're on a desert island, you're the spontaneous person, the only other human that's alive is this engineer person. It's like wouldn't be the most ideal relationship, but it would be okay for that need not to be met in that case because it's like there's no other option. Um, so it just has me really interested of like, I guess it's honestly just an internal process of like, what do I constitute as needs? Where do I need to set the bar to make sure that I feel fulfilled or gratified or satisfied or whatever it is? And I mean, as I'm thinking about this, I don't know that there's an answer for anyone. It kind of just seems like a personal inquiry or meditation to grasp what actually counts as a need.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree. And I mean, so many people have done their whole created whole paradigms around
Mm,
what is a need. I think nonviolent communication is a very comprehensive one. There's a
mm,
whole list of NVC needs, and NVC needs are not strategies. Like spontaneity, you have a
hmm.
hundred different ways you can be spontaneous. It doesn't just have to be one way. Or
Uh-huh.
connection, there's a hundred different ways you can connect, which we can still brainstorm some on this interview. And so there are experiences that you want to have on the inside. It's not
Uh-huh.
like something that you need your partner to do. And so I really like their list, but there's also the attachment research has their list of attachment needs.
Mm,
And
hmm.
specifically what which are also flexible, right? There's not specific things you need to do to meet those needs, right? But it's the behaviors that create the secure base and the safe haven, as you know, in secure
Hmm.
attachment.
Mm,
And so I mean, if listeners want, if they're like, well, I don't even know what my needs are, which I think would fall under the intellectual connection,
uh-huh.
talking to your partner about, obviously the needs are emotional. So that would be your emotional connection with yourself, is feeling your feelings, because needs are related to feelings. If your needs are met, you feel good. If your needs aren't met, you don't feel good. That's how you know. So that's getting right with your relationship with yourself. Is this a need for my partner to meet? Is this a need that I can meet on my own? Can I be flexible when I talk to my partner about it? Um, but then, I think that the relationship itself has needs, which is where the
Uh-huh.
attachment needs come in.
Mm, hmm.
But this is a little esoteric, so I think maybe it would be helpful to bring into more examples. Like, what would you suggest that somebody do, first of all, if they're not sure what they need, or um,
Mm,
if somebody does feel disconnected, either emotionally or intellectually, because we've talked about shared values. We haven't talked a lot about how to engage your partner with shared values and vision, but
hmm.
let's explore the different types of connection. So, like, there's emotional needs, and then there's, of course, physical needs and intellectual needs.
Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. Do you want to just go through each of them?
Oh, sure. I mean, do you have
Oh,
your list that you like to engage, or do you want me to share my, most prominent ones?
I don't have a list on hand. I was just clarifying which direction you wanted to take the conversation.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe we can just go over the different categories of connection one
Hmm.
by one and say, well, what are some of the needs in this category, and how would you
Uh,
then start to engage your partner if you feel disconnected in that way?
uh-huh. Great. Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, so we've talked about first the values vision
Hmm.
dimension. And so we've talked about the way to create your own relationship with yourself around that, which is most important first,
Hmm.
is to look at a list of values. I have one in my book, The Commitment Roadmap, which you can find on my website, coachvaleriegreen.com. But if you Google list of values, you'll find a bunch. I don't know if you have a
Hmm.
list of values that you give. Um, but if you do, they can go to your website as well.
I don't have a list of values. I like doing values activities with people. And I also find it's like generally like there's so many ways to find values, but I think it's actually nice to just like brainstorm them um and just see if you can like write out like 30 and just like tug at the thread and just see what keeps coming out. And then all of them
Exactly.
obviously won't be core.
Right, right. It is a process to find your core ones. I have a list of questions that I give people to
Uh-huh.
determine their core values. I mean, my favorite one is on your 80th birthday, when your
Mm.
friends and family are toasting you
Ha ha
for
ha.
what you've given to them and provided for them and provided for the world. What
Mm.
do you want them to be toasting you for?
Uh-huh. That's a great question. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
do you have any like go-to values questions that you like to use?
Hmm. I'd say like two that come up. I'll explore these because I haven't thought of them in terms of value questions. I've just thought of them in as useful questions, like clarifying questions. But one is similar. I often like to reflect on like what I like to go to cemeteries because I think it is useful to be intimate with death. But
Mhm.
I often think of like similar to your question, what I want on my gravestone. And I even had the thought recently, like
Mm-hmm.
if my partner and I, or even a friend and I had a shared gravestone, what would we want on that gravestone? Or the toast question is similar, like if I
Mm-hmm.
imagined people toasting me and my partner, what would they be toasting about our connection?
Yes,
Similar-ish
that's a
question.
way to find your relationship values. Because I agree.
Exactly, yeah.
In my book, I have questions, the same questions, but values that are important for you that you want your friends and
Uh-huh.
family to be toasting you for, and then values that are
Right.
important to share with your partner, and they might be different.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Right.
and those are more attachment needs, because I think needs and values are interchangeable. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
no, I love what you said. I mean, I think a lot of people might feel that it's morbid to think about what you want on your tombstone, but I actually think that that's a very accurate, poignant way, if you can stomach it, to think
Mm.
about, because it's only when we contemplate that we're going to die eventually that we
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh, I want my life to be about something. What's the
Mm.
legacy that I want to leave? I don't have an unlimited amount of time, because time is
Right.
the only resource that's actually not abundant.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
We talk
Good
about
point.
abundance, but time is not abundant. It's limited.
Right. Yeah. Totally. And it reminds me too of there's a visualization practice which I believe is from Stoicism, but it's called memento mori, which is just one way of it's another way of using death to clarify. And essentially like you go through a visualize you could YouTube memento mori meditation, find something, but essentially it's a visualization that your time is limited, and even imagining yourself approaching your own death, even imagining yourself dying, and just the idea is like when you snap back into recognizing how short life is and how
Mm-hmm.
precious it is, how little time we actually have here, there's
Yeah.
something about going through that process that can really clarify what it is that you really care about.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I find that to be another useful place internally to go to bring myself into clarity around
Exactly.
values.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that's so deep and profound. And I've done those kinds of meditations. They're not for everybody. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you can just ask yourself the how do you want to be toasted questions. But regardless, there's values that are important to have in and of ourselves to live our lives to be happy. And then there's values to engage our partner with that the relationship is
Mm-hmm.
about. And so how do you recommend, once you've really clarified them, to talk about that with your partner? Is it as simple as, if you feel disconnected, saying, hey, I've been
Mm.
feeling a little disconnected, and I've done some brainstorming about what I want
Mm.
my life to be about, and it would really help me to share that with you. Would you want to hear it?
Mm. Yeah. So I think yeah, I think that way that you put that would definitely be well received, or like phrased in a way that's well received, because it shows care about the relationship and enthusiasm and not coming from a place of being critical. And I think it's just actually a very useful practice, like almost the equivalent of like flossing in some bigger way, to have relationship check-ins.
Yes.
Um, and whatever the right cadence is for each person, whether it's weekly or monthly or whatever, but to just recognize that like me and my partner are going to meet and just like be candid about how are we feeling mentally, physically, etc. Are there ways that we're out of balance? And I guess two ways that I like to do this, and I recognize these are like in some ways like very specific to my idiosyncrasies, but one is I there's something about eye contact that I find nothing can quite replace the clarity that can be found in the openness of eye contact.
Yeah.
And I find just engaging in eye contact, taking a few moments to like drop in and open to each other, and then just sitting with the question, what do I need to say to make the connection feel more clear?
Mm,
And both people just sitting with that question. And I find honestly, like every time I do that with anyone in my life, the things that need to be said get said. Um, and then another approach, which is like in some ways kind of weird and like suggests my background as a mathematician, because I just really like Microsoft Excel, but and spreadsheets. But I also actually like categorizing my life and my partnership in spreadsheets. So like I have more than 5 dimensions because I also like to think about how's our creative connection or even like our aesthetic
yes,
connection, cooking connection, blah, blah, blah. And then I
totally.
like to
I think
quantify.
that's really fun.
It is, yeah. And then I like to both quantify and qualify. So like 0 to 10, how connected do I feel in each of these categories? Um, and I like numbers because they don't lie. You can't you can't like squish around them. It's like I'm just a 6 right now here, and it's not bad necessarily. It doesn't mean we can't change. That's just how I feel right now. But
Totally.
anyways, regardless of like the strategy people use, I do think like a regular relationship check-in to see ways that a couple is off balance and ways that they can figure out how to get on balance is really vital. I really do think it's vital.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's up to every couple to create that for themselves. Like me and my husband, we actually have a check-in every day and we call it dropping in,
Mm,
where we just kind of say, how are you feeling right
mm-hmm,
now? And then if one of us feels disconnected, then we ask, like, oh, is there anything that's bothering you that you want to talk about? But then, of course, it's
mm,
also a place for us to share positive feelings, things that we're grateful for, things that we're happy
mm-hmm,
about. So yeah, but I don't think that that works for everybody every day. You could do that once a
mm-hmm.
week. There's another practice that has been taught by many other coaches called withholds,
Mm-hmm,
practice of withholds that you kind of get together once a week and you say, what have you been withholding? And you
mm-hmm,
just talk about that. Because not that you're assuming the person's been lying, but it's just like with our busy lives, we don't have time to tell each other everything. And so this is a
mm-hmm,
practice to make sure that there's nothing that you're missing. So
mm-hmm.
I mean, there's various different practices that are out there. And how do you like if you haven't been having these kind of check-ins, how would you recommend that people approach their partner to create one?
Mm. I think with especially with withholds, which I'm a big fan of, especially in communities and friend groups, because I lived in an intentional community for 5 years. Having a space for withholds, it I think a community would fall apart without it. As an
Yeah,
aside,
totally.
but I find like sometimes withholds can be scary,
Oh yeah, of course.
because like
I think they actually always are.
yeah, maybe inherently they're just like inherently scary because there's
Yeah,
something the other person didn't say for some reason. But I think
right.
like the main key is always approaching from the desire to create more connection.
Yes.
So whenever I have a withhold, whether for a friend or my partner, like I always lead with like the reason I want to tell you this is because I want to feel more connected to you and vice versa. And I
Yes.
can tell there's something in here that's just blocking the connection a little bit. And I want to explore it together. And I think like
Yes.
being on the same team, so it's not like I'm launching a missile at you. It's like I have this thing in my experience. Let me take it out so we can look at it together and see how it's impacting our connection. So I think orienting towards connection and like being on the same team can just mitigate so much unnecessary headbutting or feeling threatened or whatever it is.
I think that's such a good across the board way
Mm,
of approaching any of these strategies that we'll go over is the main attitude is we're on the same team.
mm,
And if you don't feel that inside yourself, then it's important to do the inner work
good
to
point. Yeah.
feel like you're on the same team. I actually have a flow chart that I teach my clients, and that's the
Mm,
main distinction in the middle. It's like you're ready to have the conversation if you feel like you're on the same team. If you feel like you
mm,
want to be right or get your way your own way, then
uh-huh.
you go back to the top of the flow chart and you do more of the inner work until you
Uh-huh.
feel like you're on the
Right.
same team. And then you're ready to talk. And so I completely agree. And then the second thing that you said, which I think is brilliant, is that you're sharing your positive intention, not
Mm-hmm.
just that, hey, we're on the same team. That's your internal attitude. You might or might not even
Mm-hmm.
say that out loud, but your attitude is the reason I'm sharing it. And this is how you would start is because I care about our connection. And I think there's a way it could be even better. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I'm going to share this, right? So that takes away the fear that the reason you're sharing something you've been withholding or something that's not getting met is to make them wrong or punish them or break up with them
Mm-hmm.
or etc. So I think that that's really brilliant in terms of how to approach any of these strategies that we talk about. And I think it would be useful to just spend the rest of the interview on just brainstorming what are all
Mm-hmm.
the ways that people could feel disconnected, and then what are some strategies that you could do to feel more connected in that area.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, that sounds great. Um, and did you want to go through the 5 pieces or just general disconnection, not necessarily through that framework?
Well, I to go through the 5 pieces, right? We already went through the values and vision one. Of
Uh-huh.
course, there's more we can share with that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um,
Totally.
but and that also relates to intellectual, right? Because the intellectual connection
Mm.
is what ideas am I having about my life? What are
Uh-huh.
my new hobbies and interests that I want to feel seen
Mm-hmm.
around?
Sure.
Um, and is so what other ways do you think that people could feel disconnected intellectually?
Intellectually, I would say like when I think of intellectual connection, I think a lot of it has to do with inspiration. At least that's the first thing that's coming to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I mean, maybe 2 things. Maybe one is like being seen, um, and just sharing myself and being witnessed. And then the other
mm-hmm.
is around inspiration, because I feel like good conversations, like the hallmark of a good conversation is some feeling of like discovery or um or like using words to like 2 people to dig their way into some like new pocket of reality or something. Um
Mm-hmm.
anyways though, so I would say like if the verbal connection feels uninspired, that might be one thing to look out for. If that's important to you, that also might not be important to everybody.
Sure. I just want to make that even more specific,
Great.
right? How would you know that it feels uninspired? Meaning
Mm.
you would probably feel like your partner's closed-minded and judging what you just said, right?
Uh-huh.
Or they might say, like, you have this inspiring idea, but
Mm-hmm.
it falls dead because they change the subject,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Or
totally.
they're just like negative. They're shooting it down. You're excited and they're like, oh, that's not going
Yeah.
to work for all these reasons, right? That could
Right.
be intellectual
Mm-hmm.
disconnection.
Good point. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's great. I think you're right that like the maybe just the general pattern of like if I feel excitement or like something I want to talk about, and every time I bring it to my partner, the energy deflates,
Right.
there's something there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, how would you address that?
Hmm. I think in that case, I mean, like obviously with any of these, the first thing is to talk about what one is noticing, and
Mm-hmm.
see if there's like something at the bottom of it, which there always might be, like maybe in this case, the partner who's deflating the ideas feels unseen. And so they need something to show up.
Totally.
But aside from that, like an activity, I think so like I like using containers a lot to practice things. And by container, I just mean like having a set amount of time and specific rules of engagement in order to um, go somewhere new with a partner. So just thinking in those terms, like I think it would be interesting to like say, okay, let's try a conversation. And the only goal we have of this is to build on each other, like yes, and from improv.
Yeah.
If you say something, my only objective is to see if I can understand what you said and then take it somewhere new. And then when you hear that, so anyways, almost like trying a conversation with certain rules. So that could
Like
be
an
one rule.
experiment. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can say, hey, this conversation feels a little off for me. Let's try an experiment. Let's have it go this
Yes.
way instead. So that's a
Yeah.
positive way to engage more avenues of intellectual connection. If you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, what's missing and how can we create an experiment that provides what's missing, like for both of us to feel
Yes.
seen or for both of us to feel encouraged or that
Mm-hmm.
our ideas are celebrated. Like I'll say an idea and then we just spend 5 minutes celebrating it and then you share an idea
Yeah.
and we spend
Right.
5 minutes, so
Right.
yeah, exactly. I love that.
Yeah. And I think experiments are it's such a good word because it's like there's no success. Like
Right.
Maybe we try that and nothing happens, or we get frustrated. And we're like, great, we have data that happened. Let's try a different experiment. But I think the like thing that gets me excited about thinking about things in experiments or containers is that when you enter into an experiment or container, it it permeates out into the rest of your relationship. So like a very
Mhm.
obvious example, I remember I was getting interested in laughter as a phenomenon a few years ago and was just like, I don't know, it's just like laughter is really weird. Sometimes I don't know, I associate it with like glee and joy, but also like there's this aspect of like the Joker archetype,
Mhm.
is a whole nother, anyway. So,
And it could also be
uh,
used to deflect from feeling negative
exactly,
emotion.
exactly. Yeah, so much to it. So, and like physiologically to me, it feels very similar to grieving, which I've found interesting. And like when you're tickled, you laugh unconsciously. There's a lot interesting about laughter, but I was experimenting with my partner of just like 3 minutes at a time. I would just laugh. I would just produce laughter and be witnessed, which is really uncomfortable and really vulnerable.
It
And
is.
we did that a few times. It was really vulnerable. And then for the rest of the day, we were just way more giggly and kept breaking out in laugh attacks. And so I just bring up that example because it's like the things that you try in structure won't be contained, like they will naturally permeate out.
Yes, I love that because what you're saying is it doesn't matter what happens in the experiment. I mean,
Right.
it's useful data to then do another experiment, but even if it quote unquote fails as an experiment,
Uh-huh.
and you're like, that didn't work, it still might permeate into the rest of your relationship with new ideas and new energy.
Right. Yeah. Totally. And yeah. And then the worst case scenario is like it doesn't give you the result you want, but you still learn something new.
Yeah, yeah, which I mean, I think a big thing that relationships need is just novelty and newness and new
Yeah.
ways of experiencing connection, and trying experiments are really fun for that. Um,
Yeah.
I think the area that probably the most people have the most struggle with is not so much the intellectual connection, but the emotional connection and the physical, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Yeah.
But so yeah, and of course that's what we could also spend an entire interview covering.
Yeah.
But do you have any examples of a time that
Mm-hmm.
either you or one of your clients felt emotionally disconnected? And then how would you
Uh-huh.
address that within yourself and then with your partner to get reconnected?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause like emotion, so maybe the symptoms of emotional disconnection are, I think one like hallmark there is feeling some kind of like coldness
Hmm.
or feeling
Hmm.
emotionally, it's, I guess, using the word in itself, but emotionally distant or like, um, I think coldness is a good word and not, there's like the feeling of warmth and connect an emotional connection, like when I'm in that space. But
Right.
I'd
No,
say,
it's true. I mean, I think the biggest trigger feelings for people that have insecure attachment are either abandonment
uh-huh.
or rejection.
Yeah.
If we feel abandoned by them for some
Uh-huh.
reason, or if we feel
Yeah.
rejected by them for some reason.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And well, so I guess that has me think of a few things, but one is I think on a base level, the practice of appreciations is goes so far. And you can do it in a lot of different ways, but you don't even have to do it formally. You could just intend to appreciate your partner that day. But even if you, again, if you use a timer and say, I'm just going to share as sincerely as I can the things that I really appreciate about you for 3 minutes, and the other person will just try to receive and let it in as much as possible, will do something to thaw. Because I think when you get in that cold space, you like can
Hmm.
forget what's so beautiful about the other person.
I love that. Hmm.
And granted, if the specific trigger, like you said, is something around rejection or abandonment, I mean, that's an interesting, maybe in that case, there's some like ask for reassurance that needs to be given, or maybe the receiving of appreciation would be conducive to that. I don't know if you have other thoughts on specifically for anxious attachment style.
Yes, yes. Or fearful avoidant. I think like there's the ambivalent attachment style, which they say is only
Uh-huh.
5% of the population, but I would
Hmm.
guess that it's more than that. But
Yeah.
anyway, because avoidance, just dismissive avoidants don't usually get bothered when they're disconnected. It's more people that are either anxiously attached or ambivalently attached. Um, so um yeah, I think that just first of all, I love what you said about just doing a gratitude practice because that could be enough.
Mm. Yeah.
I think when we feel rejected or abandoned, we regress to being whatever age we were in childhood when we were first
Mm.
experiencing that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to do anything other than what the psychologists call
Right.
protest behavior, which is complaining about how we're not getting our needs met at a loud
Yeah.
volume. And that never really works because
Yeah.
nobody, I mean, not never, obviously, sometimes my husband is a saint when I get like that. And he's able to recognize that I'm actually,
Yeah.
feeling rejected or abandoned. But usually I have to do my own inner work first, and that's the inner child work, like to be able to
Uh-huh.
recognize that's my inner child's, you know,
Yeah.
desire, and I need to soothe her first so
Uh-huh.
that I could then approach my husband and
Yeah.
say, I mean, and I think I could say, hey, I'm feeling a little disconnected. Let's tell each other what we're grateful for. That could be enough to shift my vibe. So I love that
Yeah.
suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
If I do feel rejected or abandoned, I think a lot of people struggle with asking for reassurance,
Yeah.
especially if they're with an avoidant partner, because avoidant partners believe that people shouldn't need reassurance. They should
Right.
just be okay on their own. And so I think in terms of what you just said about the yes and, I think that's a really important tool set.
Mm.
The yes and comes from improv acting.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically you don't make the other person wrong. You find out something that you agree with about the situation, and
Uh-huh.
then you say what you want different.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a way to not make them wrong. And so that's how I would ask for reassurance if I felt abandoned or rejected. And I wouldn't even use those words abandoned or rejected because those are
Mm-hmm.
the feelings that my inner child had. I would shift my vibe. Um, and I have my own process for that,
Mm-hmm.
so that I would talk about what I want to be experiencing instead. I want to feel
Right.
more connected to you.
Yeah.
Um, and then I would say the yes part, like, hey, and it would need to be authentic. Like my biggest problem, I think personally, and also with my clients, is that it can
Mm-hmm.
get a little hallmarky with the yes part.
What does that mean? What?
Like that it what the yes part wouldn't be connected to what's actually happening. So if I approached my partner in a hallmarky way, and I said the
Uh-huh.
yes being like, I love our connection and I love you and I
Uh-huh.
really like love feeling connected, and I need this other thing, then I mean he would just feel like I'm buttering him up and it's inauthentic. Right? Like
Right.
the yes
Yeah.
has to be something connected to the situation. So like for example,
Uh-huh.
if I felt abandoned by him because we had agreed to spend time together today and he's busy with work instead.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't approach me to tell me that when I say, hey, let's connect. And he just, I'm busy,
Right.
then I might feel rejected or abandoned. First, I would, of course, challenge my limiting beliefs and look at my inner child's feelings about that. But then when I
Uh-huh.
approach him as a yes, and the yes would be something like, hey, I totally get it that, you didn't understand how much work you had today. And it makes total
Mm.
sense that you're working longer than you had to.
Uh-huh.
Got it. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And right. So if I was to be hallmarky, I'd be like, I love you and I love our connection.
Right. But like
It's
coming
not
in with
connected
empathy.
to the situation, right? That's the yes.
Yeah.
And even though I can accept that you're working, I still need reassurance
Right.
that if you weren't so busy, you'd want to connect.
Right.
And maybe we can
Yes.
collaborate as to when we can make time tomorrow because it's still really important to me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Gosh, a few thoughts there, but yeah, I love what you said at the end of like coming in with understanding their perspective. Like it's so disarming to receive, like, I totally understand you have a deadline and there's a lot you need to do at work. And I completely support and empathize you working late. Like hearing that, if I'm your partner or whomever, it's like immediately I'm like disarmed. I'm not being blamed. And then I think the other piece that you brought in there is you didn't say this explicitly, but in the subtext, it's like, and taking responsibility for my own triggers. So it's like, I understand that you have this going on. I'm having a reaction. I know this is my reaction. I know this is my trauma. And I would love your support with it if we can strategize how. And I think
Exactly.
just a quick thought too on avoidant partners, because I find, at least for me in relationships, I tend to be polarized. I've been the avoidant partner and I've been the anxious partner. And for people who are anxious, this might be common sense, but I think it's worth saying, like, being the anxious partner is unpleasant, like, of course, but being the avoidant partner is equally unpleasant.
It
It's
is, yeah.
completely unpleasant in different ways. And so I think like recognizing that when you both actually feel like connected and seen and those and safe, it's like you both actually want that. The avoidant partner wants that too, deep down, even if they have their patterns coming up.
Right.
Um, and then the last thing I'd say, because I like how you brought in the inner child piece too, because I think this might not work for everyone, but sometimes too, if I'm in that space where my inner child wound gets activated, I might just come in that space to my partner, and like they can know my body language by now, and I'll like kind of waddle over and say, Angela, and then they'll know, oh, okay, Mike is in a child space. And then if they have the capacity, they can hold me there. But that might not work for everyone. But I think there is something that can be endearing when like a grown adult is like comes to you as a child. It I think can make it more the heart more accessible.
Oh yeah. And I mean that brings in the other dimension that we haven't yet talked about besides the physical,
Oh,
which
nice
is
segue.
that child dimension that you were
Yeah.
thinking about. Because
Yeah.
I completely agree we need playfulness, which is,
Yeah.
a pleasant emotion. But then when we're
Uh-huh.
triggered, I completely agree that if we have the safety
Mm-hmm.
inside the relationship, which
Yeah.
needs to be set up through the vision and values,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that we're willing to do the inner child work together, that
Mm-hmm.
we're willing to have one of our values be that this is a healing partnership,
Yeah.
um, and define what that means.
Mm-hmm.
That then, if we're both available, that if I approach my husband and say, I'm really triggered and I feel like I'm 3 years old and
Yeah.
I really need to be treated like a 3 year old would really be treated, can you help me reparent
Yeah.
myself right now? Can you help me
Mm-hmm.
do the inner healing work? It would really help me so much if you gave me reassurance. It would really help me so much if you help me
Mm-hmm.
to, my brain is not in the right place, if you kind of acted to help me understand this thing. It's so, and then appreciate them for it after. It's
Yeah.
so endearing,
Mm.
to each other emotionally, physically, spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
to do that kind of work. And it's so delicate, which is why I think it needs to be set up with the vision values,
Yeah.
questions and stuff, and set up a container for it beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
or like agreements about it beforehand. Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of, I don't know, zeitgeist still out there, that, and especially in the United States with their individualistic culture, that everyone for themselves.
Right.
And it's my job to make myself happy. And I can't make you
Right.
feel better. You make yourself feel better.
Right.
And so, and that's all true on one end of the independent end of the paradox, then the
Uh-huh.
interdependent end of the paradox, where
Mm-hmm.
you do create how your partner feels, and you can't meet your own needs, right? There are needs that can only be met by another person, and both ends of the paradox are true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that if you are in a relationship with someone who's has a dismissive avoidant attachment style, or if you yourself do, um, that it's it is uncomfortable. And I think that's really important to understand that um a dismissive attachment style is created by either not getting enough empathy, reassurance, emotional care from your parents, such that the only way that we
Mm-hmm.
could deal with that was to decide, well, everyone for themselves, I have to be self-reliant. Or it's caused by being enmeshed, where there was
Mm-hmm.
just like no boundaries, and we learned relationships equal, I'm going to be smothered, and so I need a lot of space. And so both of those triggers are very unpleasant. I want
Mm-hmm.
to validate that. It's not fun to be a dismissive avoidant in relationship. And so if you're with someone like that, it's important to give that experience empathy, so that if you're approaching
Mm.
them for the inner child work, that's going to be uncomfortable for them, and it's important to create it, but then it's so useful for them to be able to do their own inner child work, and you,
Mm.
as the anxious partner, demonstrating that for the avoidant partner, if they're willing to hold space for you and for you to tell them how to soothe you in that moment, and then they do and it works and you feel better, that's actually inspiring them to then do that for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. And Yeah, maybe what I'd add to that on the child note, well, it's just that actually like um healing isn't a chore. It's actually quite connecting.
Yeah.
Doing healing with someone is actually like a really deep, profound, and beautiful way to connect. And I kind of had to learn this lesson in some ways the hard way, in that earlier in my sexual journey, I just had, and I still have a lot of sexual triggers, but I guess I can hold them better than I used to be able to. But I had just had so many sexual triggers. And anytime I would engage sexually with a partner, like a landmine would almost be guaranteed to be stepped on.
Hmm.
And once I found a partner with whom there was a lot of trust built, I remember just like the recognition that like, okay, we're in the sexy space, whatever kind of dynamic it is. Oop, I got triggered. And instead of that being a bad thing, it's like that's just where the energy is now. It's like it's not, it's just
Oh.
that's simply where the dance has shifted. Now we're in a space where all of a sudden I'm a baby and you're nurturing me. And then as that kind of moves as it needs to, and then all of a sudden it'll move into something else. But just like letting that be another wave to ride, um, I think is actually a pretty profound way of viewing it.
Yes. And I mean, that gets into archetypes and role play and,
Yes, totally.
like taking on different roles and moving through that and then moving into another one. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think that sex is the most um, varied way to do that kind of play with a
Mm,
partner.
yeah.
And the physical dimension is the one that we haven't explored yet. So,
Yeah.
do you want to talk more about any ways that
Yeah.
you felt disconnected from your partner and how you reconnect, or you could expound more on how you play those different roles with each other, because that also sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say like in some ways this one is like uh I mean in some ways this one is there's a simplicity to it, which is like just do it. Like whatever your form of physicality is. And I know there's this whole thing like people hate scheduling and it has everything has to be spontaneous. It's like that's all well and good, but just do it. Just like whatever the thing is you like to do, just make time to do it. Um, but yeah, a couple of ways that I think are interesting to explore different energies. Like I actually think music can be super powerful for this if you're a music oriented person. But like a simple way is like make a 10-song playlist where you both put on 5 songs from a variety of energies that you like being in, and then kind of like weave it into an arc. And then either make out to that or just choose to like be two bodies in a bed and see what happens to that. However you want to use that. But I think the reason that that style is interesting and valuable is because like if you have a varied musical arc, there might be aggression in there, there might be softness in there might be joy in there. And so it's just kind of a way to go through all these like physical elements of your relationship and just move stuck energy. And
Yeah.
I like using making out as a way to do that too, because like making out it can be so interesting. There's so many ways to kiss there's like a million ways to kiss a person. There's no rules around it. Anyway, so I just find that to be an additional interesting creative thing of like, what is it like to make out to this, however long it is, 4-song playlist? And can we do new things with our lips that we haven't done before? And just by having your bodies do a thing with each other, it'll be easier for it to naturally happen in momentum.
Right, exactly. And music, if you're an auditory person, does evoke different moods and different emotions and different feelings in your body. And so saying like, oh, how does this song move us to make out? How does that song move us to make out?
Uh-huh.
That's a definitely a way to mix things up physically.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess like let me see if I have any questions about the physical dimension, because we could also do a whole interview on that, of course.
Yeah.
Um, like, and you've already explored that you had some sexual wounding from your
Mm-hmm.
past, and that when that came up, you, I imagine, talked to your partner about that beforehand, such that then they could support you when you're in it, and then you can come out of it and move into a different role.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's useful in terms of talking about that beforehand. What might happen? Do you have a
Mm-hmm.
trigger that comes up? How would you need to be supported through
Right.
it such that you could then be more in pleasure after? And how would you want the other person to respond,
Mm-hmm.
and how do they feel about that, and what would make that authentic for them, and co-create it. So I think that was really brilliantly um explained by you. Is there I guess my other question around that would be, let's say that somebody is dissatisfied by something that's happening sexually in their relationship. Like they
Mm.
want more eye contact and they're not getting it. Or their partner
Uh-huh.
doesn't kiss them during sex and they want that, but they don't know how to ask for it. Or maybe they
Uh-huh.
need more foreplay or whatever.
Right.
Like how would you guide people to talk about those sort of things so that they could get more of what they want?
Yeah. Yeah. It probably is no surprise at this point that I think experiments are useful here. And
Yes.
there's so many modalities. One I would recommend is the wheel of consent. I
Betty
won't go too into it,
Martin. It's
but
so funny.
yeah.
I was thinking of that too. I actually trained with her.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
Betty Martin. You can Google her, and she has tons of videos about the Wheel of Consent. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
an amazing game to play with your partner, whatever stage of your relationship with that you're
Yeah.
in, to mix things up.
Yeah. Right. It is. And it's like weirdly complex to I'm trying to wonder if it's even worth trying to describe. But whatever. You could that's one modality. Other things you could okay, I think two other things to practice for communication, and one of these is wheel of consent E is just if you give me a massage and my goal for however long the massage is to be as vocal as possible, like to be picky, the pickiest possible person.
Yes.
And it's like, no, I want it a little softer, an inch to the right, an inch up, a little lighter now. Okay, now somewhere totally different. And just let yourself be so picky, follow the thread of your pleasure and desire. And just that practice of vocalizing what you want is so valuable. And I think the
Yeah.
second thing I would add is
And then make sure
I
you
think
switch, of course, right? So that you both get to be
yeah,
selfish.
no, it's all about me.
Right.
Yeah,
But no, I
yeah,
love
yeah.
that.
And then the second thing I would add is like, I think for a lot of people, sex is this thing where it's like, once you're in it, you like you're in it, and then maybe you communicate after or before, but not when you're in it.
Right.
And it's hard to, if that's a way that sex happens, it can be really hard to break that and can feel very unnatural. But again, if you have an experiment like, okay, we're going to engage sexually tonight, and the goal is to actually talk throughout it, like have our voices be a part of it. Um, Anyways, that's just another idea to play with.
Yes, I love that idea. And my husband and I have experimented with that. And what we found to work for us is to make sure that we're only talking about things in the moment, right? Not like bringing
Mm-hmm.
up something that happened yesterday because that takes you out of the moment, but like
Right.
talking
Yeah.
about like, oh my God, that felt so amazing. This is the sensation I felt. Or like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
just had a vision of you doing this,
Right.
I just had this vision of you as like, I don't know, a sultan or and,
Yeah.
and you're wearing that, like, right.
Right.
And so you can do role plays with different characters,
Uh-huh.
you could do different feelings in your body, or you can just talk about what feels good in the moment. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
or desires that you have. I agree. I think
Yeah.
that could be really fun to mix it up in the context of an experiment. I think that's a brilliant idea that you brought in, is to voice it as an experiment, because I think
Uh-huh.
that's a way that people don't feel made wrong. It's like, I like things,
Mm.
things have been good as they are, and everybody needs variety. Let's do an experiment.
Right. Yeah.
How about we practice sharing more about what we desire during,
Uh-huh.
when we're intimate. And if your partner has a fear of being made wrong or a trigger about being made wrong, then I always like to use the appreciation sandwich, which I'm sure that
Mm.
you have your own version of.
Yeah. Yeah. Tasty, tasty sandwich.
Yes, yes. Do you want to share more about how you use that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I wanted to first jump on I like what you said about sharing desires throughout. Like that's so helpful because and even just checking in too, of just like having times to check in like where are you at right now? Um and I think that it's especially useful because so much of our touch is oriented towards trying to do something that we either think we're supposed to do or we think the other
Mm-hmm.
person likes. Or and I
Right.
remember just the other day I was like, I think I was cuddling or making out with my partner and I put my hand on their hip and I just had this thought like, I didn't want my hand to be here. This isn't like what I wanted. I was assuming they want it because I've had a lot of partners that want that. I don't even know that they want that. And I asked, I was like, what do you think about this? Like, it's fine. And it was just like, oh God,
Exactly.
how much of that sneaks in of just like doing things with my body that aren't actually following the thread of my desire? So all that to say, I feel like the more vocal both people can just share, this is what, and not all desires have to happen. I feel like
Right. Right.
that's so huge. Like, for example, I might want to, I know this is a sex and relationship podcast, but this is going to sound vulgar. So I just will preface that. Maybe I want to lick my my partner's asshole. Maybe that's a desire in the moment. Maybe I know they're not comfortable with it. I can still vocalize that desire. I don't even necessarily need to want it to happen. It might be a desire that's there, but like I don't want it to happen actually, or whatever. The more desires are on the table, the more likely it is that you're both going to get what you want, which sounds obvious
Exactly.
because it's like, but it's hard. It's hard though, and it takes practice.
Oh, it's so hard. And I feel like it is useful to voice it in the beginning as an experiment. Like, hey,
Mm,
let's practice sharing more of our desires. And if one of us says something that the other person doesn't want, we don't have to do it, you
right.
know? So that gets past people's fear of saying something and then having their
Mm,
partner do it just because they don't want to, but they know that's what we want. That kind of like gets past that fear. And then you can say
hmm.
what you want and know that if they reject you, it's not personal and you can, oh, okay, you don't
Right.
want that. How about this? You know?
Right. And because some desires are so scary that it's like maybe I'm ready to voice it, but I'm not actually ready to have it. It would be like too much.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay too. If you're just going to voice it and see how that feels to voice it. And maybe it turns you on just to
Yeah.
voice it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So I think this idea of setting up experiments with, kind of like ground rules, although you don't have to be rigid about them, and like,
Hmm.
here's what we're doing, here's what we're not doing, and let's have fun with it, is a great way to bring in new energy to any
Mm.
areas of those dimensions: physical, emotional, spiritual,
Hmm.
um, shared values and playfulness. I forgot exactly how you categorize each of those five, but um,
Yeah.
I think that doing experiments are a great way, just approaching your partner and saying, hey, things feel good the way they are, and
Yeah.
I want to experiment to make things feel even better. And here's what I
Right.
propose. What do you think? And you can co-create it. That's a way to approach things and that doesn't make the other person wrong. And then
Yeah.
that allows them to feel playful and spontaneous and
Hmm.
open. Um,
Yeah.
and sharing desires, sharing what you really like,
Hmm.
sharing what you feel in the moment, like just
Uh-huh.
body sensations can be really fun.
Hmm. Yeah. And I appreciate, oh, I think I have another burp coming.
Yeah,
False alarm. False alarm. It stopped halfway through.
it
But I
helps
appreciate
us
your,
to feel that we're human.
yeah. Always happy to burp and fart to make people feel
Ah!
comfortable.
And by the way, I mean, just because you were saying that it was a little bit of a, I don't know, inappropriate or not inappropriate, but like adult desire. Yes,
Oh, uh-huh.
I do have this podcast categorized as an adult podcast that's not appropriate for children. So don't worry, you
Oh,
can
great. So I can talk about
say
assholes all I want.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
depending on what people want to hear about, but I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
about sexual desires, so I think that
Yeah.
that's a good example of something that the other person might not like, and then you can say it
Right.
anyway,
Yeah. Yeah,
and feel
exactly.
like, oh, okay, you don't want that. Well, great. Then what else do you want, or what else do I want?
Hmm. Yeah. And I also on that thread, like I have a lot of desires that I know my partner doesn't want to do. And but I still want them to know. I think for me at least, I just want to be known. That's a huge, huge part of intimacy, I think, is being known. And so there's some way in which like I want all my desires to be known, even if they won't be actualized. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't need all of my desires to be actualized in this connection or in general too. Back to the desires needs conversation. Um,
Exactly. And that's probably your need to just feel seen and accepted,
exactly. Yeah.
which is a very legitimate need. I mean, I think that's it's a nuance that I think a lot of people can understand more deeply, is that there's multiple needs that we have. One need is to have our desires actualized so that we could
Hmm.
experience that shared joy with our partner.
Mm-hmm.
but it's not all or nothing. If we share
Mm.
a desire and it's rejected and they're still open to collaborating as to how we can feel good in a different way, uh,
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and we're still on the same team and we're partners and we're co-creating things,
Uh-huh.
and then it can be, of course, as you said in the beginning, important to go through our own inner process of disappointment if we can't get what we want and we're
Mm.
really disappointed about it. And sometimes just saying it is enough because we feel seen and accepted, and then
Mm-hmm.
we're open to, then we just feel like, oh my god, there's nothing wrong with me for wanting that.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah.
in partnership where I get to be myself. I don't have to hold anything
Uh-huh.
back. Right.
Right.
And so like that's how you can feel that emotional intellectual connection even
Right.
around something else that you want not being met.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like so many creative ways to meet desires too, depending on one's relationship paradigm. But I was even thinking like so I'm bisexual, my partner is female, and I would like to have a threesome. And actually it's probably, well, whatever. I don't know that either of us feel ready to welcome that in this moment. But I had the thought the other day, like, oh, but what I do feel comfortable with would be if I had a porn video of a man masturbating while my partner and I were doing whatever we're doing sexually, and just like bringing in that energy. So the reason I bring that up is it's like maybe the desire is to have a threesome, but maybe it's not a yes for my partner, or maybe it's not a yes for me, but there's still ways to like scratch the itch or get creative to bring in sexual desires that meet the agreements of the relationship and the comfort of everybody.
Wow, I love that you brought that in,
Mm,
because although I do think that it's kind of a nuanced topic, and so hopefully people's attention spans can stay in the game for a little longer, because I think that that's a really wonderful example to expound on. Because I think it's really edgy for a lot of people, especially
mm,
for a lot of women, and for some men, of course, but especially anyone with an anxious attachment style is going to be, or most people with an anxious attachment style are going to be triggered by the idea of a threesome because they can get
mm-hmm,
jealous.
mm-hmm,
And so that might not be okay with many people. And
mm-hmm,
so, in order to even voice that desire, might be scary. And
mm,
so that's one way to talk about, well, how do you get prepared to voice that desire?
mm-hmm,
And I think any sexual desire that you don't know if your partner wants, we have to go through the inner work of imagining that they'll be disappointed and how else would we get
mm,
that need met,
mm-hmm.
because we don't want to get upset if they don't want it, right? Because it's like obviously
Right.
everything in relationship has to be co-created, especially sexual desires.
Mm-hmm,
And so that's the inner work to say, oh, right, well, would I be okay if they don't want that? Yes. Okay, then I can say it and we can collaborate. And then what yes
mm-hmm,
and would you need to have in order to say it so that they would feel like even if they're a no, that they still feel respected when you bring that up.
mm-hmm,
And that has to do with their triggers and their jealousies and what will come over them. So that's the first part. Then the second part, which I think is so brilliant that you expounded on, is that let's say they're a no, or
mm-hmm,
let's say you're not ready yet. Even though that's your
mm-hmm,
desire, you just wanted to share it to feel seen, but it's something that you're not even ready for. So that could be also a way to bring it in. Hey, I'm not even ready for this, but I want to voice it to you to see what you think and how maybe we can find a way to experience more excitement in this way while you stay safe and you feel loved and you
mm-hmm.
feel my devotion to you. And we don't
Yeah.
actually ever have to do it, and how
Mm-hmm,
can we bring some of that in where we both feel really safe and loved and taken
mm-hmm,
care of by each other? And then you can brainstorm ideas like the video that you said, but that's
mm-hmm,
done in partnership and you don't agree to do something with the other person that they're not okay with. And then if they get triggered even by the idea, then you would hold space for their trigger and challenge their limiting beliefs about what it means, and that you
mm-hmm,
want to be with them more than anyone else or whatever it is that you would need to reassure them with. So I think it's a very nuanced topic, right?
mm-hmm,
And but I think it's really brilliant how you brought that up,
mm-hmm,
because I agree that every desire we have has multiple ways of getting it met, and there's a way.
mm,
Like this is what I hear you saying, that no matter what your desire is, even if it's something that you don't think your partner is going to be into,
Mm-hmm.
There's always a way, if you bring it up inside that we're on the same team
Yeah.
and I'm saying it in order to make us feel closer,
Yeah.
right? If that's your attitude and how you introduce it, then of course you just want to feel seen and heard, and you only
Mm.
want to collaborate to do things that make you both feel good. And if that's your attitude, then yeah, I mean, I think you've just given a lot of people permission to ask for more about what they want and experiment.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, totally. There's a lot I want to say there, but I feel wary of if we're opening up another giant wormhole to jump through.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that like yeah, any of these topics could be a new interview topic.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much we can
Yeah.
talk about. Even
Yeah.
that last one, I think people probably have a lot of questions about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll just pin that like um yeah, that felt like a really interesting wormhole and brought up a lot of thoughts around what it means to support each other's sexual journey.
Yeah.
Um, and then this is a topic that we didn't get to, but I'll just post it out in the ether that I was, if we had infinite time, I also wanted to pick your brain about new relationship energy slash crush energy slash limerence or honeymoon
Yes.
phase. And that's a topic I've been interested in recently, but maybe we'll save all that for another time.
Yes. I mean, we could probably do a whole interview on that in the future if you want, because that touches on the issues of um monogamy versus opening up the relationship. It touches
Mm-hmm.
on the issues of if you have a desire for the other person, is it because you're not compatible with the person you're with, or is it because there's something that's missing for you that then
Mm-hmm.
you've been alerted to that you can awaken inside your current
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and it doesn't have anything to do with the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well
And
put.
there's so many issues around that. And then yes, I agree, like limerence, new relationship energy mimics addictive drugs in the brain.
Ah, yeah, not surprising.
Chemistry, brain chemistry wise.
Yeah.
If you Google limerence, you'll see a lot of people talking about that. And so it's really, really complicated. That's why we fall in love without looking at red flags.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're in a relationship and you allow yourself to become attracted to someone else, which sometimes it just happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there are things we do to allow ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then it's a real conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so I think that there's so many topics we can talk about that. Maybe we can just leave the question out there.
Yeah, leave it open.
Because I really think that we probably would need to have another interview to dive into that one. Um, but we can ask people to share in the comments if they want. Um,
Mm.
do you have questions about limerence, new relationship energy? What do you do if you're attracted to someone else when you're committed to
Mm-hmm.
somebody? How do you deal with that? Do you have
Oh yeah.
questions about how to deal with that?
Yeah, I'd also love to like combine into that because I know you mentioned that a portion of your audience are folks who experience anxious attachment. And I would be very curious how people who experience anxious attachment relate to the feelings of having a crush or limerence or whatever word. To me they seem synonymous. Um, yeah, I'd be curious, does having a crush in your relationship energy feel like it's heightening your anxiousness? Or I'm just curious how those two things relate for people.
Yeah, and I would love to hear people's answers to that. I know what the
Mm-hmm.
research says is that anxious attachment is also called preoccupied attachment. So what that means is that when people are in that honeymoon phase, um, that yes, somebody who has a preoccupied attachment style is going to get really triggered, get really anxious, and not be able to stop thinking, be really obsessed about the relationship, and do they like me back, and are they going to call me, and if they don't, what's going on, and are they cheating on me, do they lose interest? That kind of defines anxious attachment. But of course, I'm happy to hear from people. And I have my own vestiges of that I have healed and I'm
Mm.
still healing. It's called when we've healed from that, it's called earned secure attachment, right? So that's what happens when you
Yeah.
do the healing work, right?
Yeah. You get like a nice badge.
Yes,
Earned.
exactly. A
Yeah.
card carrying member.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess, do you have any thoughts about that? Like what,
Oh,
or would you like to call yourself out on your own attachment style or your partners and say like what happens when uh you started when you first met them or when they first met you? Like, did you feel that
mm. Well,
anxiety?
I guess I'll just share the inquiry I'm in, and I have no answers here. Uh, I am very skeptical of the feelings of limerence and crush and new relationship energy. And the inquiry I'm in right now is like when one develops that crush or NRE on somebody, is it signifying anything, any true potential about the relationship, or is it all just anxious attachment and or trauma and or projection? Because I sure as heck know that the movies would tell us that you have to follow that energy because
Oh
that's what will
yes,
lead to
of
eternal
course.
love. Yeah. Anyway, so the
And we
inquiry.
know that movies are based on drama because nobody would watch a movie where everyone's just happy and getting along all the
Good
time.
point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
So
movies
yes, of
not based
course, that's what
on
movies
healthy.
teach. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know any movie that depicts healthy relationships. If you know one, please let me know because I would like to watch it.
Yeah, I know. I'm always frustrated watching romance movies because I'm like, God, if you knew how to communicate, this movie wouldn't exist.
Exactly, exactly. But I mean, I really don't know an example of a movie or TV show out there that is only depicting what's healthy and positive, right? Because that's not
Yeah,
dramatic. It's just not gonna, keep people interested for an entire episode. Unfortunately, it would keep me interested. In fact, the only
right.
TV show that I will watch is Ted Lasso because it's mostly positive.
Oh, cool. I haven't heard of it, but I'll look into it.
But yeah, it's an American soccer
Mm.
coach who goes to
Uh-huh.
England to be a football coach, but
Uh-huh.
he's actually a life coach in disguise.
Ah,
But
uh-huh.
it's really funny. But
Cool.
regardless, I gosh, I have so many questions and answers about that. I mean, I think it would be a whole
Yeah.
new topic. I mean, the short of my thoughts on that, and then of course I want to hear yours, are that um new relationship energy, the honeymoon phase, it's also called limerence, is when we first develop feelings for someone, and that's always a projection. Because when we know somebody, that means we know their childhood history. That means we know their faults. That means we know what negative personality traits they have. That means we know their limiting beliefs. That means we
Mm-hmm.
know the things about them that annoy us. And if we know all of those and we still are attracted, then it could be real love. But before we know all those, you
Mm-hmm.
don't love means you know who the person is in order to love them.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know somebody well enough to be able to spend an extended amount of time with them. And in my opinion, you have to like at least travel with them and not just on a week vacation where everything's fun.
Yeah, no stressors.
Right. You have to see them in stressful situations and with their family and all of that in order to know their character. And knowing their character, if you still feel that deep attraction and you share
Mm-hmm.
vision and values, and they have the qualities that can meet all of your attachment needs, then that's healthy love. And yes, that
Yeah.
can absolutely start out as a crush or limerence or new relationship energy, and there's nothing wrong with it starting out that way. That's how nature designed it, so that we would get past all of the initial things that annoy us about other people to be attracted enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But in my opinion, um, that's just a start. And like what I
Do you
coach
think though that that
singles to
start has
do.
any merit to it? Like, do you
Oh,
think it's
well,
worth listening to?
of course. I mean, I think all of our feelings are worth listening to, always.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think if we have a feeling, there's always a message underneath. And if we repress it or deny it, then it's going to come back in another way.
Mm.
Um, but the message might not be what you think it is.
Mm.
It
Mm-hmm.
might not be you're meant to be with this person because you don't know that until
Mm-hmm.
you know what their vision and values are, what their faults
Yeah.
are, what their
Yeah.
qualities are,
Been
right?
through the shit
You
with them.
you just don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yes, of course, it means something positive, but before you know them, it means this is the way I want to feel in a relationship. What needs are getting met inside of
Mm-hmm.
me that this person is evoking? What qualities do they have that turn me on? That's
Mm-hmm.
really useful information for my own learning about what I need in relationship to be
Mm-hmm.
happy. They might or might not be the right person depending on whether all these boxes are checked. But the
Right.
feeling is about what I'm learning about myself. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really useful information.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that like to have a like having a healthy relationship involves so much like you said, you need shared values, you need healthy communication, you need to have been through stuff together, all that. And the reason that I'm this is coming up for me recently is I used to be very, very skeptical of having a feeling of a crush. So
Mm-hmm.
skeptical. In fact, anytime I had it, I almost like was like I immediately assumed that there was some trauma related void that this person was filling with almost an unhealthy level of attention they were giving me. But yesterday I was practicing intimacy with a colleague and we
When you
did an
say practicing
activity.
intimacy, you mean like just what kind of intimacy?
Oh, like we were practicing intimacy coaching with each other
Mm-hmm.
and giving
Mm-hmm.
each other feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did an activity where it was actually pretty trippy. We were making eye contact and just pretended that we had a romantic connection. And she was saying all of the like romantic tropes to me, like, I want to be with you for eternity. Like, this is the truest love of my life. And honestly, we like hardly know each other. So it was based in seemingly nothing. But when we had those 5 minutes of her expressing these like deep fairy tale like romance to me, I couldn't believe how much I felt it. Like it like shocked me how quickly it created this feeling of a crush. And the sense that I had was like it was like we entered a portal into an alternate reality where we had this deep sexual loving connection and we got to see what the high in that reality felt like. But of course, like you said, even if that high is real, to sustain it, you actually need to be able to build a healthy relationship. But I think the inquiry that I'm currently in is like the feelings that I get if I'm in limerence with someone, is it actually the prediction of like something, a portal into something that's real in the potential of our connection? Or is it like purely me having some trauma thing happening where I'm like attributing an unhealthy amount of value to your attention and blah, blah, blah. So that's why I bring this up because I'm in an active like questioning over what to make of those feelings.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're in a really deep inquiry around it.
Mm,
Um, and I mean, as far as what we're talking about with the topic for today and the audience, I mean, because we could do a whole other interview and I would want to ask you more questions about it, but it is definitely time to wrap up.
great.
um, that so but what I want to say about that is that what I, in my opinion, what I like
Mm-hmm.
about what you said is that how it would apply to singles who are not partnered
Mm-hmm.
yet is if you find yourself exploring all of these possibilities, asking all those same questions within yourself that you just said, that those are valid questions to be asking as long as you're aware of what it is that your values, vision, qualities, deal breakers, must haves, needs,
Mm-hmm.
are, and you're checking your feelings against those boxes. Because
Yeah.
that's, in my opinion, what we need in order to develop a healthy relationship with someone is to balance our feelings with all of that other stuff. How that applies to someone in relationship, in my opinion, is
Mm-hmm.
that as you're exploring all of this, you're doing it in connection with your partner.
Mm,
Because if you're doing that outside of your connection with your partner,
mm-hmm.
that could be emotional cheating, where you're
Sure.
then feeling closer to someone else than your partner.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I imagine that's what you're doing. You're doing these experiments and intimacy coaching with someone else. You're asking yourself these questions and then you're sharing that with your partner. And then sharing what you learn could bring you closer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I should also mention I'm in a polyamorous relationship just to give context there. But yeah, I think the thing I'll pin, this will be my last thought, is I think what you shared is useful because around if a person, I think especially an anxiously attached person, is having that feeling of limerence, the inclination will be to violate their own boundaries, to
Mm-hmm.
do whatever they need, to violate their own like identity, to do whatever they need to do to get the other person to like or accept them. And I
Mm-hmm.
think um, those feelings feel really good, but I think it's so easy to get outside of oneself and to continue to check back to who am I, what are my boundaries, what do I care about, and
What are
staying in that.
my needs? How do I
Exactly. Yeah.
tell what the person values? How do I tell if they want what I want?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that I agree. If we're identifying as having any of the insecure attachment styles, what
Mm,
that means is that we're not connected to our own needs.
mm,
The anxious person makes it about exactly what you just said. I'm going to sacrifice my own needs so the other person likes me, usually, which is also codependent. So that's not the same thing, anxious attachment and codependence, but there's an overlap. The
mm,
avoidant says, well, I don't have anything that I need. And so then they just make it about the other person because they don't
mm,
know anything about
mm,
what they need. They just judge the other person as I love them because they're um I like who they are, and they make it all about the other person and they're not connected to themselves. So I think the healing
mm,
for any insecure attachment style is to rein it in and bring it back to what do I need?
mm. Yeah.
What am I feeling? What is it that
Yeah.
I'm wanting to know in order to feel
Hmm.
secure?
Yeah. Never ending practice.
Right. And then of course voicing that, as you brilliantly said, with the attitude of we're on the same team, and I'm going to
Hmm.
voice it as a yes and,
Yeah.
validating their point of view and then saying what I want or what I'm needing or what I want to know.
Hmm.
And what do you think? And, let's collaborate. And that's the way to tell if they do want what you want and if they are willing to co-create with you. And if there is potential in the relationship, then the person who, if you're single, that you have limerence with will turn into more, if they're
Hmm.
willing to meet you on all those levels. And if you're partnered, whether you're monogamous or poly or anything in between, if you're exploring any feeling in relationship to secure attachment, I know polyamory is not for most people, but I love the book Polysecure. I believe
Mm.
the author
Yeah.
is Jessica Fern,
Jessica Fern. Yeah.
because it's a brilliant book for how to bring the distinctions of secure attachment into a polyamorous relationship. And I think hers is the best one out there. I don't know if you agree with that.
Mm. Yeah. I thought she broke it down very clearly.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's funny too, because it's like, I think she broke it down so clearly
Yeah.
that because most of my clients and audience are monogamous.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, of course, I think that's great. And I also coach poly couples too. And I legitimize all of it within a healthy boundary context, of course,
Hmm.
and agreements and honesty and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like I struggle to find a book about how to create secure attachment for monogamous couples that's written as well as
Right.
Jessica Stern broke down how to create secure
Right.
attachment for poly couples, because I think she did
Right.
such a good job of explaining what
Right.
secure attachment is. What does it mean to be a secure base? What does it mean to be a safe
Right.
haven? What are the activities you do to create that? Like, she did such a good
Yeah.
job.
Write another book.
Yeah, yeah, I
Gotta
know.
send her some
It's
letters.
funny. Exactly, exactly. I mean, I recommend Wired for Love by Stan Tatkin
Mm.
to monogamous couples. And I think because he does a really good job of defining secure attachment, but it's very like heady and scientific. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you have a better recommendation.
I don't. I mean, the first third of Polysecure is just about attachment style.
Uh-huh.
So that I think is cross applicable, but yeah, I do not have a better book recommendation on that regard.
She's just so articulate. And
Yeah,
like, this
yeah,
is what it is.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And yeah, and I mean, and is that something that you specialize in, is helping poly couples? Because in that case, I would encourage couples that are poly or want to be poly, or they're LGBTQ curious, or poly curious, or wanting to open up their relationship. Um Is that something that you specialize in? Of course, I also coach those situations, but if it's something you specialize in, then I'm happy to hear
Oh,
more about it.
I would say I specialize more in, like, definitely open to honestly any relationship paradigm. Um, but more in people who are asking big questions about their sexuality or about their gender, or about the state of their relationship. Um, I think I find myself drawn to maybe it's like transitions in those departments.
Yeah, right. That makes sense because it's so nuanced. And people really need
Hmm.
to feel if they're going to work with somebody
Yeah,
around
exactly.
exploring their gender, exploring what's not working for them in a relationship, exploring different sexual desires, that they're talking to
Hmm.
somebody who's both intelligent and they consider themselves an expert and they're
Hmm.
non-judgmental and open-minded.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so you occur to me as all of those things.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So yeah, I mean, in that case, I do encourage people to reach out to you if they have questions in those areas. And I know you also have a free gift to share with people, which is a meditation.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
yeah, so
Um, yeah, how did I made this because I led a workshop a little bit ago and was brainstorming activities and did this as an activity for the workshop. Anyways, it's I think it's 14 minutes or so, and it's a partnered meditation that brings two people into eye contact, and then essentially I'm guiding them to feel different energies or relational dynamics that exist within the connection. Because I one of the ways I think about partnership is like you are playing every part for that person. In some way, you are their child, you're their lover, you're their parent, you're their sibling, you're their rival, you're their cheerleader, everything. So in this meditation, the purpose is to create an embodied experience of feeling into some of the different threads of your connection with your partner.
oh fun. Yeah, so you're eye gazing, but you're just exploring all these different modes of feeling connection.
Exactly, yeah. And I'll say I recorded it while I was actually eye gazing with my partner. So I was like real time narrating what we were
Oh,
in, which I think is a good way
fun.
to lead meditations in general, is to like lead myself through it.
Yes, because then you're like experiencing what it is that you're asking other
Right,
people to
right.
experience. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I
exactly.
mean, I haven't downloaded it yet, so that's inspiring for me to do. Maybe I'll try that
Mm,
with my husband later tonight.
cool. Yeah. If you do, I'd be curious what you think or what you notice, or just really any reflections I'd be curious about.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll definitely try it and let you know. And of course, I encourage other people to try it and let us know what your experience is. And of course, also let us know if you have any questions
Hmm.
about anything we talked about, because I know we talked about so many different topics geared around
That's true.
all the different dimensions of how to reconnect if you feel disconnected. So I think we've definitely given people a lot to chew on. Um,
Hmm.
and so I encourage people to reach out to you. And we'll send, of course, post the link to your free gift below this video. And if you are listening to the podcast, then it'll be in the show notes. And of course, I'm going to put it up on my webpage too, if you want the full show notes, as well as Mike's bio. I believe I haven't, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I'll put it as your full name. So because I interviewed another Mike. So
Ah,
it'll be coachvalerigreen.com/podcast/ Mike Mantell. So that's Mike Mantel. So that'll be
L,
the
two
place.
L's.
Oh, two L's. Thank you.
Yeah.
See, there you go. Two
Oh,
L's.
good.
M
Good thing I
M
said
A N
it.
T E L L. Got it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's coachvaleriegreen.com. And I'll, obviously put the link in the show notes as well. But then /podcast/ Mike Mantell with two L's,
Hmm.
Mantell. And then I'll put his full bio and I'll put his website, which is it's just mikemantell.com, same spelling.
Hmm.
And we'll put the link to the free gift. And do you have some kind of free intro session or clarity session that you offer to people that want to work with you, or
Oh,
how can
I
people
do
reach out to
have
you
a
if they yeah.
I call it a discovery call. But essentially if somebody wants support with something and feels like I might be a good person to call in, I'll lead us through a call that's 90 minutes, and essentially it'll just be feeling each other out, and I would just get a sense of where you're at and what you're looking for, and we'll both get a sense of if we feel like it's a good fit, and if it doesn't feel like a good fit, I always hope the calls to be just useful in and of themselves, and I will happily provide resources or recommendations to other colleagues. But yeah, if something feels if it feels like there might be something here, I would love to be in touch with anybody listening.
Yeah. And I love that you offer that 90 minutes as well. I offer 90 minutes as well. And
Mm,
a lot of coaches don't, and that's fine. You know, they offer
hmm
15 minutes, a half hour. And that's legitimate. Obviously, I respect how everyone does it. But, you
Sure.
know, as somebody who does offer 90 minutes, I know the value of that, because that way you
Mm,
really get to connect to someone's story. You get
right.
to connect to what they've tried already to try to fix it, and then you get to
Hmm
explore possibilities for how you can help them.
hmm
And so no matter what, they're going to get benefit out of that 90 minutes of your presence.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I value, the older I get, the more I value spaciousness.
Yeah, me too. So I'm
Yeah.
really, you know, happy that. And as you can see, this was a very detailed, nuanced interview. So there's many questions that you might have. So I encourage you to post questions in the comments. And also, if you have any questions for Mike himself, feel free to reach out to him, because, you know, if you're struggling in your relationship or you feel disconnected, it always benefits to talk to someone about how you can be supported and how you can have the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, across all dimensions, feeling of joy and passion and connection, because that's, you know, what we all want, especially if
hmm
we're listening to a podcast or watching a podcast about love. That's what we deserve, is that
hmm
soul shaking love.
hmm Yep.
So
Agreed.
yeah. So thank you for brainstorming all these topics. And I'll maybe we can, you know, listeners can post in the questions if they want me to bring you on for any of the other topics that we talked about. Feel free to let
Cool.
me know. And other than that, until next time,
Cool. All right. Thank you, Valerie.
thank you.